Ms. Workman? And we're good to go.
Okay, thank you, everyone. This is council meeting number 29, Tuesday, July 5th at 5 p.m. Council did convene in closed prior to the commencement of this meeting, at which time the agenda was adopted, colleagues. So you'll recall we've done that piece already. Before I call this portion of the meeting to order, I do hope that everyone had safe Canada Day festivities and enjoyed what I think was a badly needed long weekend. So nice to see that communities can gather once again and have the opportunity to mark significant occasions in our community and in our country. So with that, I am looking, colleagues, for a motion in regards to the consent agenda. There are a number of BIA meeting minutes and resolutions listed under the consent agenda this evening. I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the consent agenda, unless there's a council colleague who would like to remove any item from those listed before you. Seeing no motion to that effect, then I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the consent agenda. Mover? Councillors O'Sullivan and Councillor Barkley, thank you very much. Yes?
Just the omission of Councillor Strachan's name from the minutes of June 21st will be corrected and otherwise.
Okay. Yes. So Councillor Sullivan is noting that Councillor Strachan was not named for a meeting for which he was present, and Ms. Backward-Cormier, we've rectified that now, is that right?
We will, yes.
Okay. So then the motion will stand. I'll look for any final comments or questions. I don't see any. Then I will call the question. All in favor, please. Good. Thank you. That passes. Disclosures of interest. Just looking again, council colleagues, for any disclosures of interest in regards to items on the agenda this evening. Not seeing anything. Thank you. Then we will work for proceeding with reports, and from the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, we have two updates this evening. One is for the Downtown Kemptville Community Action Plan, which is on your screen. And the other, of course, is the primary care strategy. However, the clerk has kindly reminded me that I have skipped through one of the more important elements of our meeting, which is the land acknowledgement. So colleagues, is there anyone who would wish to read the land acknowledgement this evening? Councillor O'Sullivan, you'll have to turn on your mic. I don't know if you're sharing a mic at that table or what's happening. Okay, you've got your own? Okay, perfect, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. The municipality of North Grenville acknowledges that the municipality operates on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. We honor the historic relationship of the Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Grenville their home. We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you, Councillor O'Sullivan. Of course, Canada Day in particular can be a difficult day for some Indigenous peoples, so I know and appreciate the sensitivity with which many communities in Canada approached Canada Day. And we'll move on now to reports, and we'll look to Ms. Genoux to provide the first one on DCAP, please.
Okay, good evening, Council, and thank you for hearing this presentation tonight. I'll be presenting on the progress of the Downtown Kemptville Community Action Plan and the associated Community Improvement Plan. Next slide, please. Council approved the Downtown Kemptville Community Action Plan, or DCAP, and the associated Community Improvement Plan, or CIP, on March 2nd, 2021. The DCAP outlines a set of financial incentives, planning tools, and updated processes and practices to enhance development in our downtown core. The targeted goals focus on connectivity and people, aiming to encourage more development in the core. Council received a one-year update on the program in November 2021 and asked for a mid-year update in 2022, so that's why we're here tonight. Next slide, please. Some of the tasks that have been accomplished in the DCAP include creating a one-contact service in the planning department as well as the building department, narrowing circulation of downtown applications, and prioritizing the review of applications for downtown developments. As anecdotal evidence of the improved processes in the planning department, one lead of a potential downtown development noted, "We have been truly impressed and grateful for the generous support, can-do policies, and accessible approach of your team." Still to come include conducting a parking study, creating a community planning permit system, or CPPS, and reviewing a cash in lieu of parking policy. Next slide, please. In consultation with our Director of Planning and Development and our Economic Development Officer, it was clear there was a need to prioritize and appropriately sequence the initiatives identified between the strategic plan, the DCAP, and legislative requirements such as the official plan update. For example, the economic development strategy will lay the foundation for the downtown revitalization plan, which will then inform the CPPS. The proposed timeline on the slide there shows the timeline for these initiatives. Next slide, please. In terms of the community improvement plan, for the facade and signage grant, we've had a few more applications since I wrote this report, so the updated numbers are as follows. So far in 2022, we have allocated $9,354 to 5 projects, with 1 project completed. This represents 19% of the funding envelope. 5 additional applications are in progress as well. The other financial programs have not been utilized so far in 2022. These programs are largely geared to the development of residential units and are promoted to those proposing developments downtown. The incentives have been well received, but no projects have moved forward at this time. Next slide, please. Intake is ongoing for 2022, and business and property owners can reach out to me at vision@northgrenville.on.ca. The CIP program will be reviewed as part of the 2023 budgeting process. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Just looking over the screens here, thank you very much, Ms. Janeau. I'd be, perhaps just to kick things off, curious as to why you think some of those other incentive programs have not been pursued by various developers. I think much of council is aware that we do field a lot of certainly inquiries and interest for some residential infill, in particular in the downtown. So do you have any comments on why you think there hasn't been uptake as of yet?
I would say as I mentioned, there's definitely interest when we're going through development review team and talking to those that are proposing developments. There is the interest there. It's just the slow process of development, the rising costs. Some developers have encountered issues with properties as well. So as they're working through their plans, we'll continue to support them and making sure they're aware of these funding opportunities.
Colleagues, anything else for Ms. Janeau at this stage? I see Councillors Barclay and O'Sullivan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to follow up on your comment about the lack of uptake, I think you'll find some residents saying, why do we need to have a CIP if it's not being used? But I think it's a great incentive, and I'm sure it comes into consideration when any developer wants to develop downtown. And obviously, if the money isn't spent, it doesn't lose the building, as it were. Just a question about the downtown plan, a secondary plan. Is that a secondary plan of the official plan? It's slated right now for 2024. Okay, I would like to see that brought up a little sooner, if possible, to next year. Thanks.
Ms. Janeau, is there any comment on that at this stage?
Yeah, the Director of Planning, Amy Martin, has indicated that it would be best to maybe get the official plan done first before we do the secondary plan, just because that can inform and lay the foundation for the secondary plan, but we can definitely look and see what can be done to either speed up that process or get it at least initiated.
Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. through you, Madam Mayor, to Ms. Chanou. Thank you very much for all the work that you and your team are putting towards this. And on the large document that was accompanying in our package, on page 21, and I looked at all of the ongoing updates on everything, and it seemed like everything was on target, and that's really good to see. The only thing that I noticed that said it was ongoing and was actually a year behind is the bike-friendly designation. And I'm just wondering why that is a year behind, and is there anything that the Active Transportation Committee could do, Advisory Committee could do to assist in that way in any way? And have you assessed where bike racks are still needed downtown? I know that there's, through Parks, Recreation and Culture, that there are bike racks being ordered right now, but I also know that there's a 8, 10, 12-week wait for delivery of those bike racks, so hopefully we'll get them before the cycling season is over for this year. But anyway, you can give me an update, please, and let me know if there's anything I can take to ATAC.
Yeah, so we're very, very close on the bike-friendly designation. We're just waiting on one last thing, which is the signage that's required to get the designation. So after doing an assessment with economic development, as well as Parks, Recreation, and Culture, we decided it would be best to put up the required signage on the new community service club signs that'll be going up, rather than adding any more sign clutter to the areas where they would be required to go. Most exciting about that is that means we have the 5 businesses that we need to get designated. So we do have 5 businesses that are on board, which was great to see them get on board. It was really easy not easy for them to do that, but they did it so quickly, it was great to see. In terms of ATAC, we can definitely update them once we get the designation, because I think it's important to promote that designation once we get it. And we also sat down and mapped out where the bike racks currently are and where they were going to go out for the season. And we mapped them out to the businesses that have got the designation so that they're in strategic locations where they need to be. But part of the designation, getting the designation as a business, depending on the category you're in, requires you to have bike racks as well. So we took all that in consideration in placing, I believe, the 3 bike racks that were not placed at the beginning of this year, or didn't have a location at the beginning of this year.
Okay, thank you. Could we perhaps promote the commemorative gift policy through that? I personally am making a donation of a bike rack through that program, so maybe we can chat offline about the location for it.
Yeah, and going through this process, we have had a few businesses reach out asking about that after they've gotten the designation, so that's exciting as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Seeing none, I'll just maybe round out that bike conversation. Ms. Chanou, as I think you're aware, the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville has also adopted an active transportation policy. There is the identification of some routes that would create some very, I think, key connectivity between neighboring communities to the north and to the south, particularly to the south in this instance. So I would welcome, I think, some further discussion or observations from yourself or council colleagues in regards to how we strengthen some of that connectivity. Of course, it's great to be a bike-friendly destination as a business, but if you're not able to capitalize on all those bikers that are coming from other places, then I think we're missing an opportunity. So hopefully that can be done with time. There is a new shoulders policy at the United Counties in terms of making sure that as upgrades are made to county roads, shoulders where feasible are paved, which obviously creates a significant opportunity. So hoping that we can have those conversations together with the county so we're not missing any opportunity. Okay. So if there is no further discussion, I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that council receive the report entitled Downtown Kemptville Community Action Plan for information purposes. Councillor Strachan, and a seconder. Councillor Wilson, thank you. Any final comments, colleagues? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good, thank you. Primary care strategy. Ms. Chanou, over to you again.
Okay, through you, Your Worship, this report will review the primary care strategy that was created in partnership with local stakeholders in the primary care field. Next slide, please. Council has received communications from residents regarding the struggle to find family physicians. Council was also made aware of a number of physician exits in the past few months. This gap was also identified in the recently completed community strategic planning process and is included as a goal for the community. Local clinics also have waitlists totaling in excess of 3,000 people. On May 3rd, 2022, Council directed staff to create a primary care strategy. Next slide, please. Staff began working with local stakeholders in primary care, including the Kemptville Health and Wellness Center, Kemptville Medical Center, Rideau Crossing Family Health Center, Kemptville District Hospital, and Ontario Health Force, and we'd like to really thank them for taking part in this process. Next slide, please. 4 strategic priorities have been identified. Firstly, attracting physicians. Second, retention and succession planning. Third, hospital support. And fourth, advocacy. Within each of these priorities, commitments have been identified that will be carried out by the local partners. I will note there are a few minor amendments to the strategy that need to be made since it was published, including some spelling changes and the clarification about family health organizations, or FOs. We've already begun implementing some of these commitments, including welcoming 4 placement medical students in the month of May. We provided information and greeted and toured those around the community that were available. Next slide, please. As next steps, we will be working with the partners to implement the commitments. One of the commitments is to investigate an incentive program for attracting physicians, and a report will be provided on this matter as part of the 2023 budgeting process. We will also track the progress of the strategy and commitments by monitoring key metrics such as the waitlist count. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Janeau. Interestingly, Minister Clark presented informally with mayors at the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville table today to alert us to the fact that they did an informal survey of every family physician and primary care clinic in the riding, and of all that responded to their inquiries, not a single physician was taking patients, but 1 pediatrician in the riding. So clearly it demonstrates that this problem is certainly goes well beyond North Grenville, and that it is a hyper-competitive environment, in which to recruit any new physician, mid-career physician, or a physician who may be in the process of looking at his or her final years and perhaps would consider a change of community for quality of life or other reasons. To that end, and you wouldn't have been aware of this, and the depth of this discussion wasn't obvious to me until I was in it. We did, informally with Minister Clark today, speak a lot about those financial incentives. We know that SDNG, the county of SDNG, in fact, has, I think, ambitiously pursued financial incentives as a way to lure doctors into their terrain. So I see reference to financial incentives. I'm just curious to know, from your perspective, I think some of council have been part of those stakeholder discussions. How much do you think those financial incentives matter in terms of North Grenville's capacity to ultimately attract physicians?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we did talk to those at Health Force Ontario about the best way to attract physicians. And the number one thing is those FO, the Family Health Organization spots. So that's number one. But incentives are obviously important, especially to those that are recently graduating. And as you mentioned, given the competitive nature and the need across communities in Ontario, we're not looking to poach doctors. So I think our focus will be on those newly graduating medical students. So in the report, you can see on page 6, we've reviewed some of the programs that provide incentive programs. Most of them look for a 5-year commitment, and most of them have a phased-in approach of funding. So you get the funding as long as you stay for the full time. So we've looked at those examples, and we can add SDG to the list as well to look at as we prepare a package to propose for the 2023 budget.
Okay, thank you. I will acknowledge Councillor Sullivan. I just wanted to share an anecdote that last night, actually, Councillor Strachan and I just happened to be picking up kids, and we were talking to a resident, a senior, who was taking the opportunity to have a short walk, and she shared that she had to go to KDH in order to refill her prescriptions, one of which was a seizure medication, and she had run out of it, and she was very concerned that she would start to experience seizures again, so had to opt for a 5-hour wait at the KDH and thankfully she was able to get those prescriptions renewed. So we know that the shortage is playing out in all kinds of ways in our community. And I'll be curious to know whether or not some of these efforts will bear fruit in the short to midterm, or if really we're going to have to tip the scales with some more ambitious efforts. I believe Minister Clark is carefully reviewing the landscape, recognizing that across much of Ontario, everyone is in the same position, and you can only churn out so many new residents a year, because even if you increase the number of students you're taking, it takes quite a number of years to train them sufficiently. So I think it would be helpful, certainly for North Grenville, to get a bit of an update by the end of the year to see if anything is shifting. There were a number of vacancies that over the past year, over the past several months, created a lot of orphaned patients, if you will, and it's been a huge stressor. So I'll go to Councillor O'Sullivan, and I do have one other question, but I'll wait until the end.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Ms. Jeannot. I know that you people here have already, the members of council have already heard my comments regarding using registered nurses and registered nurse practitioners for primary care. I work at a FIT versus a FO, and we have 3 nurse practitioners in the FIT, and they are funded through the FIT. Nurse practitioners are not funded through the FO because the doctors would have to pay them. So, and I believe it was somewhere page 50 of the large report we received in our packages. You talk about advocacy, and that includes advocating for the community needs with senior governments. So the big issue for not being able to have nurse practitioner run clinics and having registered nurses in primary care working to their full scope of practice is because of the funding model from OHIP. So I really believe the root of this problem is to go to senior government and have them address this. Why can't we have a FIT here rather than a bunch of different FOs? And a FIT would provide more inclusive, better care. You would be able to have a diabetic team. You would be able to better serve all of the patients in North Grenville. And having a registered nurse work to full scope of practice would significantly improve access. No one needs to go to emergency to get a prescription renewed for something that they're already taking when a nurse practitioner could do it. And in fact, some nurses at full scope of practice can do the prescription renewals through medical directives. So if you were in Moosonee or Moose Factory or even further north, or even more south than Moosonee or Moose Factory, you would have a registered nurse putting stitches in. You would have nurse practitioners doing almost everything. It's because of the funding model that's in urban areas in most of Ontario that the doctors will, well, they're forced, they have to pay the nurse practitioner or the nurse, and they won't do it, they don't want to do it. So if we had FITs, so I really strongly encourage that we advocate at senior levels of government. Just recently, the federal minister of health was talking about nurses working to full scope of practice and encouraging nurse practitioners into primary care. So that's a really important step that I still do not see in this strategy, and it kind of disappoints me because you do talk about advocating with senior government levels. And I spoke with Minister Clark the other day, and he agreed with me. And so I really think that we need to push that way, because a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner is good bang for your buck, and it frees up the physicians to do what only they can do. There's so many things that a physician's doing that a nurse could do, and that's why they don't have appointments available, because they're doing things that I could do. So anyway, that's my rant. And
Spoken like a true nurse.
Anyway, so I think that's an important step. I'd like to see that part of the strategy.
Certainly, I think, Ms. Janeau, before you go, in regards to political advocacy, we have submitted a delegation request with the Minister of Health in regards to the physician shortage and how we can be creative in North Grenville. I also know, really, and Ms. Janeau, I don't think it was within the scope of this report to flag it, but unfortunately, we have no hospice care in the community, and sometimes without the benefit of hospice care, we have those near end of life in hospital beds when they could be properly cared for and arguably better cared for through hospice care if we had 24/7 beds. And we know that our local hospice is also seeking a very creative solution to create some local hospice beds, which could also be quite meaningful. But over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Councillor O'Sullivan, so on page 10, you'll see that the second commitment is the municipality will advocate to the province for diversified service models, including supporting the resourcing for nurses to provide more primary care. So we can definitely add in something there regarding performing to the full scope of work, as you referenced. But that is the intention of this commitment, as we talked about at our last meeting with the primary care stakeholders. There was that move, I believe it was several years ago now, from the FIT to the FOs, the family health teams, to the family health organizations. And as you mentioned, there used to be actual substantial funding, from my understanding, for the FITs. So Health Force Ontario wasn't able to provide any indication about why that change was made and if there'd be any move back to that, but we'll definitely continue to advocate for that through this commitment.
Thank you. And I think include nurse practitioners in that statement as well, because I think a FIT would be a very good fit for North Grenville in terms of providing good service for patients and not having to have them go to Ottawa. And clearly the hospital can't support it all themselves. So.
And I think we've all observed so many nurses leaving hospitals because of
Well,
untenable working environments. So perhaps they would be more inclined to serve in a different capacity.
And
if
nurses
the conditions
have left
Yes.
because their job satisfaction goes down. If you're not working to your full scope of practice, like I would prefer to do everything I am trained to do, and you get a lot of job satisfaction out of that. And so nurses do leave to go and find jobs that are more satisfying. So.
For sure. The last thing I wanted to flag, and it's not part of this, and we haven't really talked about it as a council, but as you may be aware, Ms. Janeau, and it doesn't need to be integrated in the strategy, but through the joint efforts of the municipality and the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville, we have now secured just over $2 million to support the establishment of a CT scanner machine at KDH. Of course, the KDH Foundation is now facing the task of fundraising the remaining dollars for the equipment itself, but through good collaboration, I would argue, between the municipality of North Grenville and the United Counties, who has finally come on board to support that crucial request. It does provide, I think, a better opportunity for newer physicians to feel that they can work in a hospital where those crucial diagnostic tools are available to them, and that is also important. So that may or may not shift the terrain a lot in the next year or two, but I think it is a significant signal to any incoming physician that this community, and I mean this community being the municipality, the foundation, and also by extension the United Counties, sees how important it is to upgrade our hospital facilities so that they offer the best care possible. So lots to work with here. So we look forward to getting an update. It matters a great deal to so many here. Any final words from you before we go on? Okay. So recommendation, colleagues, that council receive and adopt the North Grenville primary care strategy. I think, Ms. Janeau, you'll make those adjustments to the nurse practitioner line. Can I look for a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Strachan, thank you. Any final comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good, thank you. Nothing from finance or the office of the clerk this evening. We're quiet on planning and development until next week, July 11th, when we have our planning meeting. So now we're moving to Public Works, and I believe Mr. Finley has the pleasure to speak about the considerable task of expanding our water pollution control plant. Mr. Finley, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Council is aware, we have been undertaking the design of the water pollution control plant expansion for a little bit of time now. So we have some steps moving forward. We thought it was time to come to Council, providing with the next steps we're getting into, as well as provide some updates on where we are with the design at the moment. So there's two topics that we're looking to go through at this point. So we'll walk you through those and some recommendations that come with those. So next slide, please. The first piece is some background on where we're heading as we get through finishing off the design portion of this project. I will come back to the design and kind of the second topic with some additional scope of work there. But the first piece we were looking at is ramping up into our next stage, which is, of course, moving to tendering and construction for this project, which is expected early of next year to start. Part of that is we currently have GL Richards, who was awarded the project for the design. However, their scope of work ended at creating and working with the tender for this project. Smaller projects smaller projects do typically include, when we tender, contract administration and site inspection services as part of a full package. However, it is industry standard for a typical project of this scope and size that they are separated. What it does allow is if the municipality did hire a design consultant that through the process was determined not to be very successful, maybe there's some difficulties there, it allows for that separation of scope of work and a third-party consultant to come in to provide contract administration and inspection services. Our proposal that was issued at the time of design does allow for subsequent phases of the work to be awarded to the successful design consultant. And what that does is provides continuity moving through the services so that the design team and the inspection team work a little bit more coherently together to see the final flow through of the project. So that's a bit of background on that piece. Next slide, please. Sorry, I talk quietly, I apologize. So the second aspect that we're looking for this update to Council is part of the design that went through. There was a hydrogeological report that runs concurrently with the design. This studies the groundwater table and how that'll be affected during construction. Typically, they are run in tandem as it does take time. So some assumptions are made on what kind of groundwater effects we're going to see during the design, and refinements are made once the final report is done. In consultation with GL Richards, the designers, 95% of the time, the results of the hydrogeological report fall in line with a lot of our assumptions during design, and just provides that refinement, moves into tendering phase, and we proceed from there. Unfortunately, we were lucky enough to be in that 5% that didn't quite mix with our assumptions. The report did identify higher than expected groundwater table levels, which estimated to us to be about, during construction, about 14 million liters of water would need to be taken per day, which is fairly excessive. There was concerns of what the ministry would think trying to get permits during construction, as well as how a contractor would handle that high volumes of water. So that was an item that was raised to us to take a look at, as well as the stratification of soils, the mixture of soils that were on the site, also provided some difficulties with moving into construction. So what came out of that report, although we have a detailed design that was ready to go, once we integrated that design with the findings of the report, it was recommended that there may be some additional studies to better understand the groundwater table, as well as how the soils will be affected during construction, and see how we can mitigate risk during construction so we don't see increased costs and delay times occurring when a contractor actually starts the project. So that was kind of the background of where we hit that piece of the report. Next slide, please. So this slide is just to give council an idea of the site layout of the detailed design that we currently have for the water pollution control plant expansion. Just to give some ideas of where we're located. To the bottom of the screen would be the Kemptville Creek. To the left of what you're looking at would come out to County Road 43, and then kind of at the top of the screen and to the right of the screen would look at the Ferguson Forest Center and the areas back in there. As you can see, we have in the fields just west of the site some of the new headworks, our equalization tanks, some primary and aeration tanks, as well as an electrical building. And then we were going to do some retrofits to the existing plant, refurbish some of the tanks, and also add a new digester tank just south of the site. So that was our detailed design plan that came through where we are about March of this year. And then we took into this consideration the hydrogeological report, and I'll run through kind of our ideas after that with the high water and the soils that came through. So next slide, please. So the analysis of the first portion of our discussion regarding J.L. Richards and providing contract administration and site inspection services. J.L. Richards, because they did the design, will act as the designer of record. They will sign off on the final design of the project, which makes sense, they designed it. Having them also provide the administration, contract administration services and site inspection, and as we mentioned before, provides that continuity of they can talk to the designer of record fairly quickly if issues come up, so that we can resolve things quickly without running into delays. There is an option of going out to a third party, but it creates that one more layer of discussions and contracts that could run into delays during the project, trying to get multiple people to communicate and be on the same page. We mentioned the RFP that was written does allow for subsequent portions of the contract to be awarded to the successful proponent. It is also in our procurement policy that we can negotiate these level of services with the successful proponent. Just in a manner to be open and transparency, we are looking for council's direction to have staff negotiate with J.L. Richards for these services and come back to council with what the final scope of work would be and a price with that as well. Again, just to increase efficiencies rather than going out for a new RFP to figure out this work, let's work with our designer and put together the scope of work instead. So that's the thought process on that first piece. Next slide, please. And then looking at...
It's a lot of information, Mr.
It
Finley.
is.
Are we a good council to proceed, or would you like to spend... Yes, I had a feeling. Okay, so what, if you don't mind,
Not at all.
it's okay, just because it's a lot to digest, no pun intended. I'll invite Councillor Barkley for some initial comments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's because we've got basically 4 or 2 recommendations on the table that it'd be good to deal with them individually.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the first one in terms of the contract administration, I understand the efficiencies involved and the lack of delays in better communication. But my question is about budget. Did we budget for contract administration? A project of this size normally we would budget for that kind of service.
Correct. We did have a budget allotment. We haven't, based on our estimates of what the cost would be, but again, that hasn't been worked out. But yes, there is a budget, currently approved budget of $8 million in 2022's budget. The understanding is that'll cover that.
So
that
it's
cost.
included in that 8 million?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
we're not talking about additional money over
No.
and above what, okay. That was my primary question as far as that goes. Thanks.
And I have a quick question as well, and I look to this side of the room. Should there be hands? Who typically builds these facilities? J.L. Richards and Associates provides significant expertise when it comes to needs assessment, environmental, and design. Would it be the expectation it would be a different entity that would construct the facility?
That's correct, Madam Mayor. So what the intent to do is to pre-qualify general contractors. So what we will do before the tender is basically put a smaller qualification out to ask for contractors that have dealt with this scope and size of project before. We'll review, they'll give us a proposal demonstrating projects they've done in the past, what they've learned, what went well, the cost of it, complexity of it, to know what matches our kind of system. We'll knock that down to the qualified candidates, and that group will bid on the actual construction of it. JL Richards will oversee as the inspectors and the administrators of the contract, but it'll be a general contractor that will do the actual work.
And you would expect a single contractor then, just one, or would there be multiple?
There would be one general with many multiple specific electricians, plumbers, HVAC, different groups involved, subconsultants or subcontractors, sorry.
Okay, excellent. So Council, we have a recommendation specific to this piece of the report. So I would invite any other questions on this piece of the report, and perhaps we can consider that recommendation before moving on to the change of scope, a proposed change of scope considerations. Anything else? I'm just looking. Seeing nothing, so the recommendation from staff is that Council direct the Director of Public Works or her designate to enter into negotiations with JL Richards and Associates to provide contract administration and site inspection services during construction of the water pollution control plant expansion. So I'll look for a mover for that. Thank you. And a seconder. I'll take Councillor Wilson. Thank you. And then finally, Mr. Finley, it seems very logical to me, given the information provided, that you would want that degree of expertise working very closely with the contractors and the subcontractors to get the work done. What is our accountability mechanism, right? If you, I assume, if you observe as there may be some delays in the process, or you see that things aren't going as planned, I assume ultimately the municipality has the oversight and the lever to course correct. What does that look like in terms of a sort of accountability structure?
So, Madam Mayor, there's a number of different factors that take in place there. There's different liabilities and insurances that we would ask from the consultants to provide. So there's professional liabilities for incorrect design that would go back if things like that took place. There's also mechanisms through the contract once it's issued of delay claims and items like that that are built into the contract that'll guide how those discussions will go. But yeah, so overall the municipality is the owner and will be on the project management table as well. We just use the expertise of JL Richards through their knowledge of other projects, how to administer that, but we have the ultimate say on where things are going and if there's delays, how we handle that.
And I assume you and Ms. Dunlop would be keeping a very close watch on their progress. I know it's taken a while to bring this to this stage, and it's good to see that the design is near complete, but I assume you both will be keeping a very watchful eye on how things proceed in the next months. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we also, there's a design review team that's through the municipality, and also some experts outside of the municipality that we've brought in as our own group to help work with JL Richards through the design. That includes the Director Dunlop as well. So there's a group of 5 of us.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Barclay?
I'd just add that every 2 weeks, Councillor Wilson and I sit down with the Director of Planning and Public Works, and that's a standing item on our agenda, and it has been for, well, over 2 years, I guess. The water pollution control plant. So Council is also providing some oversight to the extent that we can.
For sure, 100%. That's obviously very valuable. Okay, motion is on the table, moved and seconded. If there are no further comments, I will call the question. All in favor, please. All right. Good, congratulations. I'm sure you are relieved by the adoption of that motion. So we'll go to the second section of your report. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we'll look back at what I had mentioned before about the hydrogeological report and what was identified as high water table, different soils and different parts of the site, which was a bit of a surprise. We had high bedrock in some areas, and what kind of makes sense as you went towards the creek, the bedrock dropped off as well, and we ended up with some organic clays underneath some of the potential design buildings that we were looking at, which makes construction difficult. So there's 3 areas that we looked at how to mitigate risks of when we get into construction dewatering, How do we control that dewatering as well with the soils? How do we risk not affecting the existing structure? Because of course, as we build around the treatment plant, it still has to function. We still have to treat the waste. So we had to look at those different items of what are the risks, how do we mitigate the risks, or how do we further understand the risks? And that's where some of this additional dewatering, which is scope change 6, came into, was proposed to us through JL Richards and their subconsultant Thurber, who is the hydrogeological experts. Understanding, we did some boreholes. We had an idea of the high water table, but those are only in certain locations on the original boreholes that we did. So what they've come back to us because of these risks and to try and mitigate these risks is do additional boreholes, do some pump testing to actually determine how the groundwater table is affected if there was dewatering to take place. And then we'd have a better understanding of what to tell the contractor how to deal with certain zones of the construction. So that's what scope change 6 came through. And then also part of that with the soils that came through with scope change 7. And I do apologize, we have in there to relocate the digester dewatering facility. I guess it was on the conclusions that I changed the wording. It is a relocation because of the clay materials, organic clay materials underneath that portion of the site. The high dewatering, there's a lot of risk of basal heave and effects on the existing digester buildings. Right now we just have multiple lines on drawings. If we move this facility, there's less impact to the existing construction or existing facility. There's also less clay in the area we're proposing to relocate, as well as we're hoping the soils are a little bit better so that we can dewater traditionally rather than some higher level dewatering, increasing costs. So we're looking at changes now to decrease costs during construction and potential delays once a contractor got in there. So that's the idea between scope change 6 is the extra dewatering study and scope change 7 knowing the difficulties that would be there. Let's move this portion of the site to a better constructability area. So next
And
slide.
dewatering, what is dewatering?
So the groundwater is at a certain level that we need to put structures underneath that. So we have to pump out the water as we dig our excavation hole, and then pour concrete. And you have to keep that dry for the concrete and soils to work. So it's keeping that hole. They're large. A normal excavation, we know we have high water table in the area, but a normal water and sewer excavation pipe is a short duration. It's open for. Typically, the contractors can handle it with a few pumps. Put in pipe and we bury it again, and the water table goes back up. With excavations this large, it's a little more difficult to manage if you have high water table that we've run into. Keeping that water out and keeping the area dry. Also the type of bedrock that we have, they say there's many fractures in it, so not only will they have the typical groundwater coming from the bottom of the excavation, it may even come in through the sidewalls, which again is another challenge for a contractor to deal with. So if we can understand that better, we can the idea is to mitigate those risks, or at least lay it out for the contractor to understand what they're getting into before we get into construction. The more information we have before construction gives us that power to if a contractor is looking for extras, we can give them all the information we have to deny additional claims moving forward.
And is it by virtue of the fact that there's provincially significant wetlands nearby that is making that particularly sensitive?
That's correct, Madam Mayor. That is one factor. So we have the provincially significant wetland just beside the creek bed. That becomes a sensitive receiver for that dewatered material. We have to make sure there's certain quality constraints on it so that we're not negatively impacting that, as well as the Kemptville Creek. And again, the digester building being so close to the creek, there's worry about the impacts it will have there as well. So it's like I said, we were in the 5%, 95% of the time it all works out. We were the lucky ones in the 5% that additional challenges, not that they can't be addressed, but just we have to mitigate them. Next slide, please. So this map, again, it's going back to the site plan, but it's showing the 3 locations that the additional studies are going to take place. Location 1 is in the existing aeration tanks and primary clarifiers. And what's happening there is with the retrofit, we actually have to cut through the floors, the concrete floors of these tanks, and go deeper. And the concern there is with that high water table and everything sealed off around it, how is that water going to come up that excavation when it takes place? So we'd like to do a bit more study there to just understand the effects. There may be additional works in the contract involving grouting to mitigate some of that extra water. Because what also comes with that is if you have significant amount of water to dewater, are you taking fines out of the existing underground soils? And is that going to have effect on the current existing building? Is there any settlement that's going to take place? So we want to understand these items before we have a contractor in there digging that up. Location 2 is similar to the issues in location 1. It does taper out. The soils change a little bit. We are further away from the existing building, so those effects aren't as bad, but there is still a high water table. We just want to understand how the contractor, if they can traditionally dewater this, or if we have to have extra works involved. So that's the idea with location 2, which is the greenfield area and our new primary clarifiers and aeration tanks. Of course, location 3 is the item I mentioned earlier about the new digester and dewatering facility. And that's where they have the high clay that is making this a difficult site to construct. Again, also in close proximity to the existing digesters. Once we took a holistic look of how will a contractor actually do this, there is a number of risks that make it a difficult area to construct. So the idea of the relocation would be to take this design and almost move it, I guess, to the top of the page a little bit across our service road, better soils further away from the creek, and from initial looks should be able to have a better construction site. So again, reducing costs. It's not saying we couldn't build it where it is right now, just the costs become multi-million-dollar dewatering investments that it may not be worth that. We have a better chance to move it up and save some dewatering costs. So that's the idea with location 3. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the 2 conclusions that we'd brought forward to council regarding the contract administration and site inspection services, as well as the approvals for scope change 6 and 7 that were just discussed. Again, that does fall into the $8 million budget that was approved for 2022. Next slide. I think that's all I have. Next slide, please. I think yes. And that,
I think you're good.
Any questions?
Colleagues, any questions in regards to this piece? Clearly proximity to the creek, which I assume is typical. I mean, most water sewage treatment plants have some proximity to a natural water body. Is that the case or no?
They typically do.
Yeah.
What that typically acts as is a backup if there is a failure to the system. It's a relief. We actually don't discharge to the Kemptville Creek. We pump it to the Rideau River. Okay. But the proximity of the creek is where it was located, and that's what we're working with.
Well, having all of the information up front, I'm sure is valuable, and if you can create those efficiencies in terms of relocation onto a slightly better land, it certainly seems to make sense to me. Council, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see that. Doreen, is it Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr. Finney. Thank you for this explanation, and thank you for clarifying what dewatering means, because I was about to ask that too, and I actually looked it up this afternoon, and to drain a waterlogged or flooded area, so I understand that's what you have to do during the construction so that you can pour the concrete and all that stuff. But then the second definition was to remove water from sediment or waste materials, in theory, remove the water from sewage. So I think one of your diagrams there had a spot. Was there a specific dewatering segment in the whole system for taking the water out of the raw sewage?
Through you, Madam Mayor, correct, Councillor Sullivan. There's 2 processes involved there, and maybe that's where some of the confusion was. There's dewatering during construction, which is removing the water so we can excavate. We also have a dewatering facility, and that's exactly what it'll do. We will remove the liquid out of the solids, put that back to the front of the plant, and treat that liquid. Once we've digested the solids, it gets land applied through another company. So
Okay.
so there's two pieces of dewatering there, but yes, both processes. One will be used during operation of the site, and one's during construction.
Okay, so I'm glad I got both definitions in. Thank you. And then the other question I have is, were hydrogeological tests done prior to the construction of the existing site? Because I sort of thought the closer to the creek, the higher the water table would be, and so if we're doing this new site further back, and we've identified this problem there, is the problem also in the original site?
Correct. There is high water table throughout the site. We had some boreholes from the original construction. It showed high water, but not as high as what we're seeing in the study now. There is about a meter difference between the two, but that couple feet adds challenges. So that's why we had some original assumptions that we went with as we did the design and kept the hydrological study going. So there were some slight changes, but until we had all the information, we worked on those assumptions of the original. But I'm sure they had quite a time dewatering during that construction as well.
Okay, thank you. So relocating the second part, the new part, and you suggested moving it further away from where the plan has it now. Are the two sites going to be linked, and will that create a problem if you've moved it further away, linking it with the original site?
So the only piece we're going to move is that digester and dewatering facility. The rest of the tanks that we're showing, we're going to stay where they are. We're just going to manage that dewatering during construction. They will be interconnected. They have to be. There will be some changes in how they're connected. The original design, we had an underground tunnel that connected both digester buildings. Of course, with moving it further away, it's not feasible to do that. So there'll be some channels with the pipeworks that interconnect, but it won't be an underground tunnel for maintenance access. The operators will have to go outside and move from building to building. So there's some operator efficiencies we may lose out of it, but we will gain in the construction side of things.
Okay, well, thank you for the explanation. I have learned a lot in the last few years about what you do with wastewater. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Any other questions, colleagues? Councillor Barclay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too have learned a lot over the last few years. And one of the things I learned recently is that, dewatering is part of the process, the ongoing process, especially when you're wanting to expand. And I think of when I bought my house out in Oxford Mills, taking a look at the sump hole and understanding that the water would come up and fill the basement if I didn't pump it out regularly. So I understand on a much greater, more complicated scale that that's what we're dealing with, especially if we want to dig down deeper. And it's my understanding, and perhaps you can correct me, that doing these testing now, and it's got quite a hefty price tag of $300,000, will prevent overages in the millions should we not do it. And those assumptions that we made based on previous hydrogeological testing, didn't prove correct. So it's very prudent right now to do this kind of testing before we start digging. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor Barclay. What part of it, what we've actually through talking with industry experts, is a lot of the study. A general contractor would probably require a lot of it once they read the original hydrogeological report. So we're almost at a point where we're going to pay through the contract plus a potential premium from the general contractor to do the study, or we're going to do the study ahead of time, understand the results, control the results, so that we can make sure we're the knowledgeable owner that's putting out a project. So it's a benefit to do it ahead of time. Also, it does prevent the delays that a general contractor may get into if they work with that high water table. So there is millions that is potential savings by doing this work now.
Okay, looking over here, seeing nothing. No questions from that side of the room. Just quickly, Mr. Finley, did I see a 32-week construction cycle? Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Mayor. The current estimate from the consultant is a 32-week. Now, once we finish the design and are ready to tender, they will provide us with an update on that, just to see if they think things have changed or not. But yes, currently we're looking at a 32-week construction period. And
so that first phase of construction, once, I guess, once those adjustments to design are made, once tendered, right? And once active in the field, I'm assuming the build wouldn't start until next spring, is that correct?
That's what we're anticipating at the moment. Madam
Okay.
Mayor.
Everything else being equal,
Correct.
right? Because you can't build through the winter, so you're really looking at a spring build in 2023.
It would be a spring start.
Spring start.
Once they got going, they'd plan for their, knowing that it's a multi-year construction, the general contractor would plan for their winter construction periods and what work in the future winters, how they'd handle that to keep construction moving, keep timelines moving. But just by the time we tender and have an award for the contract, we're looking at spring of 2023 to start.
Okay, but 32 weeks being,
At spring, the start of
yeah,
spring. Yeah.
okay. Sounds good. Colleagues, yes, go ahead, Councillor Park.
Yeah, I don't want to delay passing this motion, but I have a general question about the water
Yes.
pollution control plant after we
Sure.
move and.
Yeah, no problem.
pass it.
Okay, we have a mover and a seconder, I believe, for this resolution. Oh, we have yet to obtain it. Okay. Councillor Barkley will move. Councillor Wilson, you'll second. And that is that council authorizes the Director of Public Works and her designate to sign 2 contract scope changes with J.L. Richards and Associates to allow for additional dewatering support and additional design work for the water pollution control plant. We have a mover and a seconder. I'll call the question unless there's more. We're voting in favor. Okay. That is unanimous. Thank you. And I'll go to Councillor Barkley for his general question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to possibly Mr. Finley or the Director of Planning. This is the Solicitor General question about the fact that they're paying proportional costs. And I know it's quite dynamic as changes such as the ones that we're describing. But the numbers I've heard rounded off are it's a $40 million expansion, and the Solicitor General is covering off, as of today, about $13 million. Is there a defined proportion of cost that the Solicitor General, how do we calculate what proportion? What figure do we have a figure? Do we have a percentage of the cost that they'll cover?
Just, if
I
I
think
might,
I'm going to give that to Mr. Dyke. Is that right?
thank you, Worship. Just I'm going to start out just from a context standpoint. The costs for related to the correctional facility aren't proportionate costs; they're actual costs. So the costs associated with what they need to run the plant, they're responsible for 100% of those costs. So it's not, there's no proportionality on the costs. It's their costs are their costs in relationship to what over and above what we're doing on the expansion of the plant. So it's an actual cost basis for what they need.
So is just a follow-up to that. Thank you, Mr. Dyke. I've seen the term proportion. Maybe it's coming from the Solicitor General saying that they'll pay their proportion of the cost. Is that just semantics or what?
Yes, in the sense that they're paying what their costs are.
Yeah, so their portion
For
of the
their
cost,
portion of
not
the
proportional.
capacity.
It's not
No,
proportional.
no.
Okay.
So the municipality is not absorbing any of the costs associated with the infrastructure needs of the new correctional facility.
And
And
that's
to be-
and that's a dynamic figure that changes as things come up. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Finley.
I just wanted to make one clarification, Madam Mayor. We discussed a 32-week construction period. It's a 32-month construction period.
Oh, I
do
apologize.
apologize.
Okay.
So I just wanted to correct
That was my
that.
misunderstanding. So it is over multiple winters?
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I was trying to make sense of that myself, so thank you for that clarification. So over several years. Okay. And then, Councillor Barkley, I think the other thing, just to make clear, of course, is that the expansion of the water treatment plant or water pollution control plant was certainly in play well before the correctional facility. So the correctional facility has not been a catalyst for this expansion, but given that it is likely to come to our community, they are anticipating their needs and costing them so that they cover them fully, and we are not left to absorb them. And I think we're fairly confident in all the conversations that have been had with the Solgen that that will absolutely happen. Okay, 32-month, thank you. All right, so the motion is on the table. We have passed it. Councillor Barkley, you were asking an additional question. Is there anything else on this subject matter? Seeing none, we will move on, and I think Ms. Dunlop, you have the pleasure of talking about the County Road 43 MOU, which has its own complexity. And I would like to say, as probably you will, that This MOU was also passed, was also considered and ultimately adopted by the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville Council table, I think just a couple of weeks ago. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So tonight's report is on the expansion of County Road 43 and moving forward with the cost-sharing agreement as we move towards tendering. Next slide. The municipality has been working with the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville and their design engineers to finalize the detailed design and for them to provide an updated cost estimate. The expansion of this phase of County Road 43 runs from Colonnade Roundabout to 200 meters west of County Road 44. It will include expanding the roadway to 4 lanes with select areas with center medians, a replacement bridge expanded to 4 lanes, active transportation and pedestrian facilities, aesthetic landscape features, and upgraded lighting for both pedestrian and roadways. Next slide. The 4 new roundabouts will be located at the Kemple Retirement Living, Stinson entrance, Anniversary Way, Shoppers Drug Mart Plaza entrance, and at County Road 44. These roundabouts will have pedestrian crossing features, including PXOs, push-button units at the major crossings. Next slide. This is the draft design for the County Road 44 intersection. It shows the pedestrian facilities as well as the bypasses and center roundabouts. Next slide. With the design complete, the county and their engineering firm are moving towards tendering and completion of the land acquisition. The detailed construction estimates have been used to create the breakdown for the cost-sharing agreement, which covers not only the construction costs, but the design and other responsibilities, such as submission of the paperwork for the provincial and federal grant funding and the division of those grant funds. Next slide. At this time, we are recommending Council approve the Memorandum of Understanding and authorize the Chief Administrative Officer to sign. Next slide. That completes my report, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Your Worship, before
Mr. Knight,
Council.
go ahead.
I just think I want to take the opportunity to compliment Director Dunlop and her dogged determination in dealing with the counties on getting these numbers. I think it started when I first got here, or before I first got here, and through CEO Brown and now CEO Callery, is that Karen's efforts in making sure that our portion was properly recognized should not go without compliment as to the effort she put into the project.
I can only say it was a hot topic at the United Counties. Unfortunately, the efforts to fully, I think, clarify respective costs for the project were not always well appreciated by all of County's council colleagues, but certainly we got there, and thank you, Ms. Dunlop, for your work. I think it's important to note that the municipality of North Grenville co-applied for investing in Canada infrastructure funding. This was a federal provincial pot of funding. By virtue of our co-application, we in fact doubled the amount that the counties could receive in support of the project. So that the total amount received was approximately $8.8 million. By extension, we were able to apply a proportion of that funding to our own costs here in the municipality. At the same time, I think we have proven to be a good partner with the United Counties because the proportion of their costs from the grant that we received on the county's behalf is also significant. So thank you, Ms. Dunlop, for ensuring that we as a municipality were able to benefit to some extent from the grant that was received. But ultimately, what matters in regards to County Road 43 is that the project is proceeding, and we are ever closer to breaking ground. And I know many of the remaining details around property acquisition and a tendering of construction will be forthcoming in the next few weeks/months. I'd also like to say that I know the Chamber of Commerce in particular has a strong appetite to ensure they are well informed about the project, and we look forward to an upcoming meeting with them where we will have the opportunity to introduce the chamber and council to the project management team that will oversee the phases, the various phases of County Road 43 expansion. The first phase, of course, being the bridge. So that is where we'll all begin. And then the road expansion itself will get underway once there's confidence that the bridge expansion from a 2-lane to 4-lane bridge is well in hand. I don't know, Director Dunlop, if there's anything to add.
There is, Your Worship, if I can, in regards to the communication strategy and the
Yes.
Chamber of Commerce and the BIA. So the county have hired a contract administration company, Macintosh Perry, who will also be taking care of the communication strategy. North Grenville will be an active partner in that, and we have reached out to the chamber and expect that Macintosh Perry will be coming in front of council on a quarterly basis starting in September to make sure that they keep council apprised of any points as we move forward, as well as making sure that the communications in the 43 corridor and the surrounding areas, because we're all residents of North Grenville, will see this project as it comes to fruition.
And that communications piece will be absolutely critical, not just, of course, for council, but for existing businesses, but to put people's minds at rest. I don't believe that we'll see any impact on existing businesses on the County Road 43 corridor in the remainder of 2022 and likely for the first, if not second quarter of 2023. And the bridge construction, just to reiterate, we'll see the current bridge stay open, a parallel 2-lane bridge being built, and once that bridge is completed and functional, the old bridge will be demolished and rebuilt. So there will be no significant disruption when it comes to the bridge works in particular. So I know that question is often presented to me and other council colleagues, so it is important to underline that every effort is being made to minimize impact of traffic flows on County Road 43, given how heavily used it is. So with that, colleagues, recommendation is that council approve the MOU between the municipality of North Grenville and the United Counties on cost sharing as jointly recommended by both CAOs here in North Grenville and at the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. The second recommendation is that council authorize the CEO or his designate to sign the MOU for the cost sharing for the expansion of County Road 43. Can we treat these as one? Ms. Babcock-Cormier? Okay, perfect. So, I'm sorry? I'm going to call for a mover. And then, yes. Have I neglected to ask for questions? Okay. Thank you for that reminder. So, I'll look for a mover and a seconder, and then the motion will be live. Councillor Barkley and Councillor O'Sullivan. All right, now we'll go to questions. Councillor Barkley.
Yeah, I have a comment first and then a question.
Okay.
I'd like to personally thank you, Madam Mayor, for the hard work that you did at the county's table to move this project forward and keep the best interest of the municipality at heart, and also to our CAO, Mr. Dyke, and Karen, Director of Public Works. It's a very complicated file, and it's been 10 years in the making. As I mentioned earlier today when we were talking about the water pollution control plant, Councillor Wilson and myself both have the opportunity on a regular basis to get into the weeds, and certainly County Road 43 expansion has been a standing item in our discussions. So we've managed to ask questions about this memorandum of understanding, the percentage of the costs that we bear of the total project, contingency funds, etc. My question is, I understand that there won't be any construction until July of 2023. So the next year, are we trying to finalize land acquisition? What are we dealing with over the next year?
Well, certainly I can tell you at the county's table that in multiple closed sessions, the pursuit of the required property, whether it's held by an individual, businesses, or government agencies, is very active. So the county is looking first to make sure it has all the property it needs in and around the bridge, and is working its way out. So legal counsel has been retained, offers are being made, and for the most part, I would suggest things appear to be going fairly well. Maybe Ms. Dunlop, you can elaborate on that.
In my discussions with the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville, I would agree with that assessment. They're moving forward in regards to the process. They still, I do not know, I am not privy to how many they have signed and how they have not.
Mayors around the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville table, including myself, of course, are getting periodic updates, and where a negotiation requires particular direction from council, it is being brought to our attention. But for the most part, the acquisitions, as I understand it, have proceeded as planned.
Thanks. So just to be clear, like any work on bridge abutments, et cetera, won't happen until all the land acquisition items are dealt with?
I defer to Director Dunlop.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. The land acquisition in around the bridge, of course, all land acquisitions will take place prior to any construction. Typically, in a construction of this size, you would like to have all land and utilities all laid out, et cetera, prior to the tendering process. That way you don't have any delays, which could indicate an increased cost for the construction itself, but the intent is that all land acquisitions around the bridge and full construction will be moving forward and secure prior to the full tender. They will be doing their pre-qualification process, just as Mike had explained for the wastewater treatment plant. They're going to be running that process and then having a smaller pocket that will come in for the tendering, which streamlines and makes sure that you have qualified candidates for the specific product that you're constructing. The bridge also has a couple other sensitivities, being close to the provincially significant wetland and the sensitivities of certain birds and turtles in the area. So they will have to make sure that those mitigation measures, as well as the timing of construction, are taken into consideration, which may push back which was the indication in regards to the bridge, to push back not till a July 2nd start for the bridge, but we'll probably see some other activities prior to that date.
Just a final comment, if I can, just for the sake of the press and the public, that the municipality is one of the property owners that has to be dealt with by the counties, and that's a third party. We accept a third party assessment. No negotiation per se is going to take place.
I'll have Mr. Dyke speak to that.
Actually, no, we're treating ourselves like any landowner within the Highway 43 corridor, and making sure that we receive fair compensation for the land that the municipality will be taken from the municipality for the expansion of the highway. And it's being, so we are in the process now of reviewing some documentation from the counties, and we will be reporting for council further on any direction we need to proceed with that. So it's not just an acceptance piece, it's actually a categorical review and analysis to making sure we're receiving fair value for the land.
But that'll be through a third party assessor, correct?
That is correct. One is being consulted, working on behalf of the counties, and if we need to see fit, we may bring one of our own to evaluate the proposals received from the counties.
And that model is applying to every property acquisition. And should a private property owner want to offer their own land assessment analysis from an additional third party, they can do that. And then that is discussed and negotiated internally. So the fair market proposition applies to every piece of property that will be impacted by the 43 expansion, whether it's bridge or roadway. Any other questions? I'm going to look over here. Don't want to neglect anyone. Okay, Councillor Sullivan, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Director Dunlop. What's the estimated time from the time they start the work on the bridge, which say is July 2023, till completion of the whole project? Like 32 weeks?
It will not be 32 weeks, no, through you, Your Worship. It is estimated to be a minimum of 2 construction seasons, highly likely 3.
Okay, so 36 months. Okay, thank you.
if I could add to that, I think there's considerable sensitivity at the county's level, at the municipal level for how to, minimize disruptions because it's such a heavily used quarter. So I think by pacing construction potentially over more years, it may provide that opportunity to reduce disruptions to the highway itself. So I think until we have the tender submitted and confirmed, some of those details will not be available to us, Councillor Sullivan. It certainly has been a very, very long effort, a very concerted effort, but an effort that intensified over the last 3 or 4 years to get urgent improvements off the ground, and we're ever closer, but I will be quite relieved to see that activity on the bridge happen early next spring. I think we'll see a little bit of bridge works before the robust construction begins, so I look forward to that very much. Okay. If there's nothing else, I believe that I've read the recommendations and I've received a mover and a seconders. I have. Thank you for that reminder. If there are no other questions, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Thank you. All right. So with that, items under correspondence have been dealt with through the consent agenda. I do not see other business as part of tonight's package. Ms. Babcock-Cormier, is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. Notice of motions, colleagues, any notices of motion? Seeing none. None on County Road 43. We'll move on then. I believe that we've dealt with consideration of all bylaws. Is that correct, Ms. Babcock-Cormier?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so questions from members of our community and the media. Anything from the audience this evening? Yes. If you want to be heard, you should come down to the mic. Otherwise, your question won't be recorded. Apologies. Are you going to ask if we ranked number 1 or number 2 nationally in participation? That question has been asked, but not fully answered. We're waiting for an update from participation. Sure. Feel free. Go ahead.
Well, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Council and all the other committees that were associated with Canada Day. We were in Oxford Mills and Kemptville, and I think it was just great entertainment. And when we came back to Kemptville, it was so nice to hear the kids laughing and dancing around, and it was just great. And I think it was just top-notch.
Well, certainly the Kemptville District Community Association in particular, since 2019, has taken the lead on Canada Day festivities, and they put heart and soul into it and certainly work extremely hard to mark the occasion. I had the chance to dance alongside a number of other councillors to a very popular local band. So it was a good day, not just here in Kemptville, but in Oxford Mills. My kids had the chance to play some traditional games, as I think some others did. So it was really neat to see Canada Day celebrations, not just here in Kemptville, but in Oxford Mills, which I know for many decades now has been marking the day as well. So, and how fortunate were we to have such good weather too. So, all in all, nice to see the effort and to see so many people sticking around for Canada Day. That was nice to see as well. Anything else? Seeing nothing. Heather, have you received anything by email?
I confirm that I've not, Your Worship.
Okay, great. Then we'll look to the close of the meeting. Our confirmation bylaw is that bylaw 5822 to confirm the proceedings of council at its regular meeting held on July 5th, 2022 be adopted and passed. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Strakian, Councillor Wilson, thank you. I'll call the question on that. All in favor? Good. And the very non-debatable motion of resolution to adjourn at 8:08 p.m. on July 5th. Looking for a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Barkley. I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Good.